Palmer, really excited to have you on Growing Unicorns. This is episode 9. So it's actually pretty exciting to have already done this 9 times, have amazing guests. And our previous guest is actually also from G2. So I'm really excited to have both sides of the perspective. Palmer, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you focus on?
Sure. So currently, I serve as the Vice President of Brand Marketing and Communications at G2. I'm a relatively, new face at G2. I joined over the summer in July, but had been a G2 customer in my last 2 roles. So pretty familiar with the brand, with the product, and it's been a smooth transition so far. Before G2, I led marketing at a small call analytics firm called CallRail based here in Atlanta. And then before that, I spent about 8 years at MailChimp and wore a variety of different hats from the brand side to the demand side, all within sort of the marketing sphere. And that's, so about the past 10 years in the SaaS world. Before that, I was doing digital marketing in an entirely different space.
Yeah, that we connected when you were at MailChimp, and that was feels like a long time ago.
I think everything feels a long time ago post COVID, but it probably was back in 2017, 2018, and it was it feels like a lifetime ago, as I'm sure it does for you.
Yeah. Some days are so similar. I'm like, is it 2021 or is it like 2020? When did it all happen?
I was talking literally a meeting earlier today. We were referencing something in 2019, or like that was like a lifetime ago. I was like, it was 2 years ago, like literally exactly, but it just feels like a different era.
Yeah. And then today we want to focus more on like how brand and comms work in the marketing sphere, and like how brand and demand works together. What have you observed the brand and comms change during and after COVID?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think we were already on a progression to where, at least speaking specifically in sort of like the B2B SaaS world, where I think people were starting to find more and more value in the brand side and sort of how it marries with the demand side. I think there's some good advocates for that, and people sort of recognizing that we can't just be focused at the absolute bottom of the funnel and just really be trying to capture there. There's a time and a place for that. And performance marketing, is absolutely the flip side of the coin in my mind to what brand marketing is. But really, I think COVID has just made folks think about brand in a different light. I mean, there are certainly, we don't have as much going on in sort of like the trade show world where you might just go out and be trying to kind of like drum up brand awareness, even down to some of the more experiential or out of home or those sorts of things have sort of lost value in the post-COVID world. So I think that figuring out what brand marketing looks like in a digital sense, and then even into more of like what we think a lot about at G2 is sort of the thought leadership side of like what can we actually unearth, what could help kind of move the needle forward, and it may not be something that's going to result in someone converting immediately or even getting into the sales funnel immediately, but how do we keep that conversation going? So I think like everything, COVID has made us kind of reevaluate what works and what doesn't, but I do think that there's this like very healthy discussion and value being put on brand marketing just in the broader B2B SaaS space that, when I started at MailChimp 10 years ago, I don't think that was there. Like it was more of just like strictly we're doing demand gen performance and like we want to hand off leads to a sales team. And like that's what marketing exists to do. And I think we're looking at it much more full funnel now and putting value and sort of how both sides of the marketing equation work together, and then how that works on the sales side. So that's been a very encouraging thing to see. And I think, frankly, you look at the bigger and the best sort of SaaS brands out there, and it's sort of or SaaS companies out there, and it feels like there's a common thing of companies like Slack, companies like Zendesk. They've put a lot of value in the brand side as well as the sort of performance side, and I think that that's starting to bear fruit.
Mm-hmm. That's such a great point. I guess so many questions from founders is like, okay, when should we consider building a brand? Mm-hmm. And the answer is always depends on your stage and like type of business, etc. How would you answer this question if a founder?
Yeah, and I think so. A lot of times people misunderstand that question. And they're like, someone's asking that, and secretly they're being like, well, when do I have to put up millions of dollars in marketing budget to go do splashy billboards? And it's like, no, that can come way down the line when you actually have millions of dollars to go do that, millions of dollars in revenue to go do that. And I think initially it could just be, hey, I want to start developing my presence on social media and like building a brand for myself and for our company. Or it could just be starting small and like thinking about how could you even activate, how could you create some merch, some swag, something that feels different, that feels unique? How can you go activate that at an event? How can you use that as a touch point with your customers? And I think that is just a really small way that any founder, no matter what category you're in, mm-hmm. what you sort of offer, what stage, there's small ways you can start building a brand. And I think it's very, very smart to do that as early as you can, versus saying, okay, we're going to wait till we get to, 10, 20 million in recurring revenue. And then we're going to think about what brand marketing is. It's like, no, it should be part of your marketing funnel or marketing strategy from the get-go.
Actually, how do you define brand marketing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, it probably depends on sort of what framework you're using from a marketing perspective. I kind of see it as the true upper funnel of marketing. What are you doing to create awareness for your product, for your service? And, I think it's important to sort of also delineate or sort of define what metrics are you using for that. It's going to look very different than, it's not about handing off, leads. It's not about getting folks to kind of convert on site. In a lot of cases, it may be being able to sort of define what sort of impressions or engagements that you're getting on social media. It could be just, very truly defined as brand awareness of how many folks know who we are and what we do. But to me, it's that very top of the funnel, and it's where you want to start from a marketing perspective. It doesn't mean you can't do the bottom parts as well, but you really need to define that as sort of a full stack, as some folks might define it.
Yeah. Would you say think about a brand story, defining even the style is part of brand?
There's sort of a story, sort of a messaging house of how do we want to talk about ourselves? In a lot of cases, we did this early on at, MailChimp, a voice and tone sort of guide of how do we want to write about ourselves? How do we want to refer to ourselves? What does that look like? And that doesn't have to be this, giant exercise that's dozens and dozens of slides deep. It could be just a very simple one pager that you can align an entire company from engineering to sales all together to say this is our story and this is how we talk about ourselves. And it can really start with something as easy as that. Now, it takes some work, and you want to get some buy-in from folks to make sure that you're aligned there. No one wants marketing to just be stuffing that down their throat, but just kind of saying, hey, collectively, are we all aligned here? And this is how we kind of move forward from that starting point. That's how I've seen it. And again, I think the other thing is knowing that that's going to change and evolve over time as your company grows. So there's an exercise of, maybe it's every year we need to revisit that. What do we want to tweak? Where have we evolved? Where has our product evolved? Where, has our story evolved? And make sure that you're capturing that.
I really like the idea of a one pager brand story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes just like putting things on paper and say, this is our story. This is how we communicate, and here's our style. And like, just to say that once is not going to stick. You got to like refer this document over and over again. Probably.
I mean, even as someone who's created those in the past, I'm like, well, I need to go back and like, how did we say it? Like, what do we define that as? And that's a big part of it. And I think too, that's not to say you don't need to go do the big exercise and put the deck together with all the different pieces and parts, but maybe align on just that simple one pager, or so here are the core pieces that everyone needs to refer back to, or you want to have everyone aligned to. And that's been a typical starting point for that exercise in the past. And I think another area too, now that, you mentioned it, jumping back, one of the things I think folks struggle with brand marketing is just KPIs and metrics and defining those, because it's not that you can't measure it. It just looks a lot different than other parts of marketing do. And I think people get very hung up on that of like, well, how many conversions did it lead to? Well, it's not like we're defining that metric a little bit differently, what we want to do there. So I think that's also just sort of helpful in terms of just like the brand story and helping define that, really getting to a spot where you set expectations, certainly with leadership, that it might look a little bit different in terms of how we measure success. But I think folks that, leadership that truly gets marketing is going to understand you need both components of that to make your marketing complete.
Yeah. Like that's probably one of the most asked questions, like how do we measure brand? Are there a favorite metrics you like to go to, or are they different at different stages, different type of companies? Or
I'd say it's different at different stages, but it's also different around like what sort of resources do you have to measure it? Like, for the larger companies, I can reference back to my time at MailChimp towards the end there, when we were a very large company, we could commission like a global brand study and go like actually measure brand awareness in different areas and all of that, and report back and have that consolidated and inform our marketing. If you're a startup, you don't need to have that. And you shouldn't be thinking there. That's a later stage sort of piece to get to, but you're going to have very good, website metrics. You're going to have great social metrics. So there's these areas where you can start and just sort of like, really, it's not even that important to figure out like where the benchmarks are initially. It's sort of, where are you trending? Are we seeing better engagement over social? Are we seeing more visits to our blog? Is our time on site getting better as we invest more in content around that? Those are all sort of like brand metrics I think you can triangulate around to sort of figure out what is that, maybe create a dashboard or sort of something that you can refer to pretty regularly and just trend how things are going there. And I would just argue that you shouldn't be doing that in isolation of your other marketing KPIs, that it's a holistic view that you want to look at there, because I've seen it where you can get your funnel sort of out of balance of like, well, you can focus too much on the upper funnel, just like you can focus too much on the lower funnel, and how you're allocating dollars, how you're optimizing that spend. I think you need that holistic view versus just a channel specific or a funnel specific view.
Absolutely. Okay. This is getting good. I love to get into like, the nitty gritty sometimes.
Yeah.
And as you know, I love numbers and metrics. I'm going to like dig a little bit deeper into this. So when you commission a brand study, what are the key metrics you actually measure? And so that's one. And two is in your brand dashboard, like what are the top level brand metrics and what are the secondary level metrics you track?
That's a great question. You're going to keep me honest here on a few of these. So let's start with the, brand study is pretty simple. I mean, it takes a great sort of, research partner or some sort of group to go out and field this, but very simply, it just starts at like, both brand awareness in terms of like when folks have you heard of MailChimp? And then, and sort of brand favorability would be part of that, of like, well, what do you think? Do you have a positive or negative opinion? And then you can sort of do that alongside some of your competitive set and sort of see how you're trending. And frankly, for us, see how we're trending in different geos and that sort of thing was important for us to measure. And then, secondarily, I think that there's a very easy way to tie what you're measuring from that brand side. And you can go deeper if it's, there's ad recall, there's like media specific ones that you can go in and say, have you go that area from the brand side, but you can also put a pretty nice through line to the product side. And for us, as we were at MailChimp, at least evolving to do more than just email marketing, that was something that we were always kind of measuring of like, okay, they know us and they know us for email marketing, but they don't know all this other stuff. And so that's where we need to focus on what our message is. And you can overlay that into any sort of category as your product's evolving. Use that to sort of understand. And it's just a great way to tie brand marketing and product marketing together because they're certainly a lot of times can feel like two separate, operations or two separate functions. But ideally, they're tied very closely together because you want to be pushing a brand story that ties very well with your product or product marketing story. In some cases, should be one and the same. So that's how I would think about that. I mean, but I do think you can, even through some of the, whether it's Google or some of the ad networks, Facebook that are out there, you can run very basic brand studies based off what, even if you're not spending a whole lot of money there. So it's not like you've got to go engage Ipsos or something to do some major study. But I would encourage most brand marketers who are spending something significant from a media spend to be looking at that.
Yeah.
And I think it's very informational. It also really helps when you do get those inevitable questions from leadership or a board around, well, why are we spending this amount of money on, like, what are we seeing from that? And you can actually back that up. That's one way outside of, multi-touch attribution, all those things that sort of can come later on, but very simply put, you have that there on the brand side. So that's sort of the brand study piece. Again, I think it's a helpful guide for anybody that's doing brand marketing or spending money on brand media. The other thing that I would say that's, I think, really important from the brand dashboard side is I don't know that there's an exact recipe for what works for everyone. If I'm just kind of drawing it up myself, based off what a B2B SaaS company would want to see, I think you've got to have, your basic sort of web metrics in terms of engagement, visits, time on site, that sort of thing would be guiding it. And then you'd probably want to start looking at some external metrics, whether it be social, if you are spending, money on media, like we talked about earlier, some of those, and just being able to tie all those together. So for me, it's less about the specific metrics, and it's more about having kind of alignment and buy-in across the board that those are the right ones, and then sort of going from there, and then actually using the dashboard and referencing it and making sure that you're using it as some sort of a guidepost along the way, because a lot of times what happens is, analytics team or person goes out, spins up this dashboard. Everyone's like, that's great. And then no one looks at it again. Or two people reference it all the time. Nobody else knows what's going on with it. So if you're going to build these dashboards, you need to make sure that they really are, everyone's aligned with the metrics and then bought in to say, yes, we're going to look at this weekly. We're going to look at it monthly, whatever the right cadence is.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. This is so good. It's very actionable, like for the founders who's listening to this, and you can literally follow the recording of this and establish your dashboard. I love this. It reminds me of the brand campaign I just helped build, and we very similar. We did both of a brand study with a firm who's like specialized in brand measurement. Yeah. They measure like aided, unaided awareness, brand familiarity, brand affinity, and of course we have like a set of of competitors that we measure against. So that's the survey side of things. They also did a media measurement, which based on the cookies of people who were exposed to the ad, who's not exposed to the ad, to be able to measure the lift of the ads, which I found like that's like really, really great to be able to see on the multi-channel perspective. Is not only, okay, like Facebook is telling us the brand lift is 20%. It's like you can tell if you use Facebook and Google together, what is the lift, versus you only have Facebook, what's the lift? And, versus if you have out of home or other channels, and what's the lift? So I really like that, like more down to that level.
And two, I think, I think we, both sort of agree that sort of like agency led or big firm sort of brand study, it's like, that's going to come later stage and you have resources. But what I would say, what you just mentioned, the brand lift side, Google, YouTube, Facebook, I think you can get those for not a whole lot of media investment. I don't know, I may be overstepping there, but I feel like it wasn't like you had to go be spending millions of dollars to like get that sort of research. You can do it pretty, you can spin those up pretty quickly and pretty easily and pretty directly. And it's really valuable data that you can get to sort of read out in terms of exactly what you said. What sort of brand lift do you see, and tying that into what sort of channels work together best, what channels work together, work best on their own, and that sort of thing. So I think that's always, those are the sorts of questions every marketer is kind of trying to solve is like, what am I actually seeing? And sometimes where we can, and I've fallen in this trap of just getting too channel specific of like, well, I'm just like, here's our paid search, and I'm just going to like heads down in paid search and look and see what's happening there, versus not understanding, well, how is that YouTube campaign that we're running actually affecting that? Or how is that Facebook campaign, and what might we be seeing because of the interaction between the two?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so I like to play devil's advocate as well. So here's a challenger question for you. I heard folks questioning the brand lift study of Google, like, YouTube or Facebook. It's like, oh, like Facebook, it's of course going to say Facebook has X amount of lift, right? Like, oh, of course YouTube is going to say like it's working really well. What's your opinion around this argument?
Well, I think some level of like skepticism is healthy, and without naming names, some places may need to may not be doing themselves the best service in terms of like what they put out publicly around that. But I think if you approach it from all things being equal, I've certainly been there. I get targeted by those sorts of ads. I use Waze a lot here in Atlanta, and I get targeted like, did you just see an ad about someone like that? And I generally, as a marketer, try to answer those as truthfully as I can, but I think that the same thing can be said across all these other platforms of like, whatever. They would have every reason to sort of skew that, but I think honestly, getting the sort of real life results that you're going to see from that is healthy for everyone. It helps folks know what channel is going to work best. Not every campaign, and I can say this too, of like, not every campaign has that brand lift that you're looking for. Sometimes you run it and it looks pretty flat. And so that's if we were always getting an A+ on those, I would have reason to question it. But I've certainly been part of those where it's like, well, we thought this one was going to do really well, and the results look pretty negligible. I don't think I've seen one go backwards, but I've seen one where it's like, well, we didn't really move the needle there one way or the other. And so I think using those studies is a real sort of guide as you're assessing, results and sort of trying to measure impact is a good way to do that.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think aligning as close to truth as possible aligns with both parties' interests, because you do want to know like which creative has the better performance versus another, and and of course, like if we can measure brand search lift or like a conversion lift, and that's a secondary that you can also help validate.
Yeah. And I think too, as I'm reflecting back on all the different like vendors that I've worked with over the years, if you're working with like an account management team or a vendor of some sort that's always giving you good news, it's like everything is working perfectly, there's a reason to be skeptical there of like, like you want, frankly, the best partners I've had have been able to challenge and say, well, you tried this and it didn't really work that well. So, maybe think about, plan B or reverting back to that. So I think that's all sort of, a healthy way to sort of assess what your marketing program looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some of the tools or agencies or systems that you used or heard good things about? Is it like SurveyMonkey or like a Qualtrics, an Ipsos, or Cantor? Like how do you think about all these measurement tools and agencies? Yeah,
I mean, some of the bigger the firms, the market research firms are great, but you want to be to a certain level before you engage them because it's not cheap. I do think things like SurveyMonkey, or even just like very basic kind of using a Google form to get some feedback on what you're seeing there. I mean, anyone can go do that. So it sort of runs the gamut of where you are in your life cycle. You want to be nimble. You want to be relatively cost efficient if you're on the sort of the early stage side and figure out what works there. And then you can kind of grow into those bigger solutions or external kind of third party solutions that are out there. But I think that frankly, as we've gone through like the past decade, there's so many more tools out there to use. And frankly, too, I think that there's a lot of folks, even in the broader, whether it's agency or vendor landscape, who are more attuned to both sides of the equation. I've enjoyed seeing the silos kind of get broken down between, well, we're just a performance side or we're just a brand side. It's like, well, if you're doing it well, you're going to have components of both of those in what you're doing. And so I think that, frankly, like on even like, the folks that I worked with at Google over the years on media, it's like, well, they got better in terms of understanding, paid search is a big performance channel, but there's other channels here. And we've got to figure out how to work with how those interact and what sort of the expertise is there. And then, even down that too, to working with some bigger, like, creative agencies, you want folks who don't just do that big splashy brand stuff. There's a time and a place for that, but that's generally for those big campaigns are going to run during the Super Bowl. Most folks are going to need some sort of dual purpose thing. We want to figure out how we can do interesting display and video as well as sort of very actionable performance marketing stuff too. And you need to find a partner who's going to be able to engage that, whether that's an agency or even your internal designers. I think that's a great conversation to have with your counterparts on if you're, do have a designer who you might be doing things in-house, just making sure that you're on the same page of how we're approaching this from sort of a full funnel view, and making sure that thread, that sort of continuity is going to be across all of it.
Okay. One of my favorite topics, creatives. So you mentioned something that may work for both. And I'm genuinely super interested. I've seen more of a brand focused creative that's more storytelling. Typically it's with real actors. There's some sort of like story arc and stuff. And then I've seen performance creatives that's more like a product features, benefits, and there's a call to action of sign up now. And I think that could be a limited view. That's what I see a lot of people do. What is your opinion around creatives that works for brand building versus works for performance marketing? Same creative can work on both or vice versa. What do you think?
It's funny. I remember I was talking to somebody about this recently of like, as marketers, we always like to go, well, this is what the first touch looks like. And this is the second touch. And here's the third. Just like, in reality, it never works that way. Like no one engages with you in the way that you think. I mean, it's a good framework and it's a good way to think about like, how do you want to introduce yourself? How do you want to then get someone to engage and then convert? But in the real world, it's a lot messier than that. And so that's why I think that trying to build that level of continuity is all the more important, because someone may actually engage with your very low in the funnel sort of social ad with an offer and a strong call to action before they see your 30-second digital video spot that you pulled together. So what I think is important first is to make sure that no matter who sees what when, that they can be able to identify your brand, that they know it's you like through and through, and that can come to life either like very visually, or it can just be in sort of going back to that brand story that like you're talking about yourself the same way consistently, no matter if it is a minute-long YouTube pre-roll or if it is just a very like a 300 by 250 display ad. Like it should somehow feel the same, and it's not easy to do, but I think like that's the goal there, is to make sure that no matter where you are in the funnel, or whoever you're targeting, that it feels like it's part of the same brand, the same company, the same story, and that's just the starting point. Now, I would say that one of the tough things that we as B2B SaaS marketers have is like, we don't have that product to then go like feature in the creative that we make. That's always been the struggle of like, well, we want to talk about this feature. How do we bring it to life in a way that's actually compelling? That's not just another cheaply animated like person that's sitting there. How do we bring it to life? And I think that's hard. And I don't know that I think that's just a common struggle that we're all going to face and have to figure out a way through. But I think that you can, through, a compelling brand story, as well as really strong sort of, offers, features, and frankly, CTAs there that you can help overcome a little bit of that. But in my experience, that was always where the struggle was. It's like, okay, we can nail the brand part, and we understand the very low in the funnel, like what's going to work from a conversion perspective. But like, how do we put that product piece kind of in the middle there that's going to connect the two? And it was just very hard to bring that to life in a lot of ways, because it's like, no one wants to just see another, like I said, animated figure or another screenshot of the application. Like it's this, there's got to be other ways that we can engage. And I think that's, an area for B2B SaaS in general to sort of focus on getting better at.
Yeah. I think creative is always like, it makes such a big difference. I'd say, when we look at certain channels, it's like creative is 80% of the reason whether a certain channel is successful or not. At the same time, you can spend, like hundreds of thousands of dollars to develop a big video.
Yeah, totally.
Campaign and not knowing until you actually launch whether they work or not.
And I mean, that's the risk with any campaign, but I do think that there's ways that you can. It's one thing if you're doing a big giant, rebrand or something big splashy like that, you've got to just that's a leap of faith and you got to go do it. I mean, you can do some testing and focus grouping and all of that beforehand in terms of the campaign. You can go out that. I think in a lot of other ways, though, the beauty of like what the digital marketing sort of tooling and kind of landscape looks like these days is you can be pretty iterative. You can try things that figure out what works and what doesn't. So it's not just like, yeah, boss, you need to sign off on this huge budget because there's no other, we can't, we'll know when it's over if it worked or not. Like, no, there's ways that we can sort of build into that. And I think, frankly, building some good structural kind of creative guidelines and ways going back to the almost the brand story piece and sort of how it all comes to life. That's a big component of that. So you sort of create this big sandbox in which you can try out all of these different creative approaches that still feel like the same brand and really hone in on what works, what doesn't, what messaging resonates, which ones don't. And then also that's a way, as we know, we're always kind of launching new features, new integrations, things like that is an easy way to ease those in to your media mix, or frankly to your marketing campaign mix, and see what works, what doesn't. But it really requires you to be nimble and quick, and it goes back to that. You've got to have reporting to understand what's working, what's not, but again, like the A/B testing that's out there now, and the opportunities that you have to do that, it's never been a better time to kind of adopt that mindset and approach.
So I really like that. So a more deeper question again is, do you practically, do you just, put it on YouTube and let it run for 2 weeks and see which one have a bigger brand lift? Or do you send out a survey to 3,000 people and have them select which one they like? Or how do you actually do that?
Well, it's going to depend. Like for me, it kind of sort of depends on a couple things: the channel, as well as where it is, where you want it to fall in sort of the funnel. I think the things that are lower in the funnel, it's okay. Well, you just test it out. See if you're aligning that to the right KPI, it should prove itself out pretty quickly. If it's conversions, if it's even kind of mid funnel, sort of clicks to site, things like that. That's a pretty easy one to sort of measure and see where you can have true winners. Sometimes that's sort of the softer end of we ran 2 cuts of this video. We don't really know which one's better. That may be one where it's let's, send out, let's try and get some feedback or A/B that with a survey of some sort. But I don't think that there's an absolute, a hard and fast right or wrong way to do that. A lot of it is just make sure you're doing some sort of testing and sort of evaluation for how those pieces run. So, and I think that the one that you mentioned of a lot of times too, based off budget, as well as what, sort of channel or vendor you're using, you'll get a good recommendation of, hey, you need to run this for 5 days. You need to run it for 10 days. You need to run it for 2 weeks before we can kind of get good statistically significant results back.
Yeah. I found measuring performance creative is much easier because I can just see the conversion pretty soon, versus brand creative is really sometimes requires a more sample size to really understand the impact. Well,
and two, I think this may go against some of what I'm saying, but I always, you can't put the same sort of rigor or sort of hard science around the true top of funnel brand stuff as you can the bottom of the funnel stuff. There should still be a gut feeling of sitting in the room with whoever your marketing leadership or company leadership are and saying, this just feels better. This feels like who we are and what we want to put forward. I think that there's still a place for that. Now, obviously you want to test it out and make sure that it's part of that, but I don't want everyone to think that it shouldn't be a giant A/B decision tree all the way down. At some point you just say this is us. This is the foot forward. This really aligns with our story, with our values, with who we want to be. And you go with that. There's definitely room for that. And I mean, I can say that from experience. We had early days of MailChimp. We made a lot of those kind of gut decisions. This just feels like who we are. And, you want to have that paired with the right other pieces, but that's a big part of it.
Yeah. That's the art side of marketing. That
science. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. One potential risk is now we talk about numbers so much, and for the less measurable side of marketing, it's people are getting more and more uncomfortable about not being able to measure. But there is the art side of marketing that it's may not ever be able to measure.
Yeah, I mean, there's I'm going back there's still I rewatched Mad Men recently, and so I'm doing the Don Draper of just at some point, there's just there's the creative that's just saying this is the way, this is the best pitch, this is what it should be, and it's not necessarily something you can measure. It's just you're in the room and you say this feels right, or you're on the Zoom call and you say this feels right. More apt these days, but I think there's a big part of that of measure what you can, but also believe in what feels right too. I don't think that that's the wrong way of looking at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that's the intuition piece that was built over, many years of seeing good creatives, bad creatives. It's like, it's in an experienced marketer's blood or repertoire. That's like sometimes really hard to distill into like 1, 2, 3, 5 rules.
Yeah. And I think too, what's been interesting, I mean, this is branching out a little bit more from what we're talking about, but just like, I remember a while, especially in sort of the B2B software space, where it was like, you went to everybody's website and it always had some color of blue behind it. It was like everything was all kind of the same. And you're like, I get it, but there's a little bit of groupthink happening here. And like, we should be able to distinguish ourselves. And I think you're seeing that now. You're like, even some newer companies just have like bright, splashy colors and just like different ways of branding and looking at themselves. I mean, visually, I think that's great. And I think part of it is like, a lot of that's coming from the traditional enterprise roots of B2B, where it's like you wanted to be buttoned down and part of that. And I think that frankly, over the past 5-10 years, we've been able to bring a little bit more of life and some fun. And it's like it does, just because it's B2B doesn't have to mean it's boring, and it's like, let's actually, bring it to life in a way that feels fun. And I think that's a good trend that you'll see more of, because ultimately, like we're selling to people, and a lot of that decision is the same decision that you make as a consumer outside of your B2B life. And I think we lose sight of that sometimes, of like, oh, just make it look interesting, make it compelling. And that's going to be a big part of it, versus trying to figure out that we've got to go through this big B2B lens that's got to make everything seem stuffier or more buttoned down or different. It just, present it in the way that you would if you were selling to a consumer. And I think that that's something that we have to remind ourselves every so often.
Yeah. Like it's such an important point. And that, the trend to like consumerization of SaaS and even like a product-led growth, the importance of the end user, of like everyone who touches the software becomes more and more important.
Right. I mean, that's certainly what, I think you teed up some of the findings from we just did a big like software buyer behavior report that we put out a few weeks ago. And that was like exactly the headline. It's like consumerization. We've known that. We had a lot of good data that then backs that up, of like, even in the very big kind of enterprise software space, like you're seeing the time to buy is getting faster and faster, and more folks want to actually try the thing before they're even kind of engaging a sales team. And so I think a lot of that, that consumer mindset then bleeds through. But I do think that there's like a little bit of a change in sort of mindset that has to happen, because for so long with B2B software, especially on the enterprise side, it was like, we're just going to make this sound really complicated because that'll get you to talk to sales. You know what I mean? Like, like, I have no idea what that means, so I've got to go talk to the salesperson to find out what it is. And it's like, I don't know that that's the way. Like, people want to know what it actually, like, speak to the features, speak to the person, speak to how it's going to improve their job, their life, not just use a bunch of buzzwords. And we're not there yet, but I feel like we're on the track to where it's like, okay, cool. We're all going to start talking about this in a way where we can understand what this product does, what it delivers. And I think that's frankly like a good change.
Yeah. It's so true. It's like, especially the proliferation of SaaS tools, right? There's so many other options. If the person doesn't understand, maybe before you're the only vendor and people have to talk to you, but now like they would just go to a competitor's website and that actually talks to them and sign up on the other website.
Yeah. And so like we've, speaking just from the data that I know it's right in front of me, of like, we've got like, I think it's 100,000 different products listed on like software products on G2 right now. It's like, how are you going to stand out when you're competing against that many folks if you're making it purposely hard to understand or even hard to differentiate yourself? And so it's sort of like, okay, let's make this easy to understand, speak directly, speak clearly, and then make it interesting or compelling. Like, do something that actually is going to catch someone's eye or turn in their head in a way, and say that, metaphorically, but just, make them stop in their timeline or whatever, their feed that they're scrolling through to actually look at that. And I think that's an area where, to get back to what we, started the conversation with, like, that's how brand marketing can really help, kind of tie into the more mid and lower funnel sort of tactics that you're running.
Yeah. I'm open up the floor. If any of the audience have questions, feel free to jump in and ask. In the meantime, I have another question. So Palmer, you took this big role of, you're running brand for G2, which is like growing so fast and such a great brand. What's your first 90-day looks like? One of my colleagues at MailChimp, Amanda Malco, is the CMO at G2. And so she reached out to me about the role and left me a very great sort of first 90 days, sort of here's what we want to kind of get involved with. And frankly, for us, we're growing and hiring is a big part of that. So building up and scaling the teams is like, I think what, a priority for a lot of folks in the software world, certainly for mine. And it's a crazy job landscape, hiring landscape right now. Every company is different. The way that we have G2 marketing structured is we have a product marketing team, we have a revenue marketing team, Robin leads, you talked to last week, and then I lead brand marketing and comms. And within that, we have traditional brand marketing, we have events, which we are, knock on wood, going to next year start being able to like actually go in person to some things and get outside of just the hop-ins and the Zooms of the world. So building that out. And then we have a comms function. So for us, that's PR, that's thought leadership, that's really helping us sort of establish G2 is sort of the where you go for software, whether you're buying or selling software. And so a lot of it, that first 90 days is figuring out like, what's the foundation that we need to have to go out and succeed at those. Like there's several things. It's like, I would love to go jump into that buyer side of how do we get more folks to G2 to start engaging with us from that buyer perspective and leaving reviews and that sort of thing. But that's going to come next year. And so it's like, well, let's knowing that, let's build the team, let's build the support what we can from the seller function, and then kind of maybe help grow some areas that we haven't invested in as much recently. So a lot of that is on the comms, PR, and thought leadership side, and really aligning teams cross-functionally to go do that. So it's been I think I'm right at my 90-day mark now, so I can say that we've done most of that. But it's with G2 is in a unique spot of being a fairly recognizable brand within the B2B software landscape, and frankly, it's had great marketers build that over time. So it's sort of like, where do we go? Godard, our CEO and co-founder, likes to use the peak terminology. Like, where's our next peak? Like, where are we going from here? And so that's been a fun thing to sort of plot out with Rob and Amanda, some of the new folks that are there. And really, it just comes down to that. Like I've said a couple of times here, I feel like just building that great alignment across the team, as well as with leadership of like what you're going to focus on now and what's going to come later. And frankly, aligning the metrics that go with all of those. So far, so good. I'll come back in a year and tell you what where we got to. That's amazing. With that, Palmer, this has been such an illuminating conversation. I love what you talk about, like about what brand is, all the way to measurements and to like, actually, what do you ask in surveys? And we all went all spectrum, and I love that we're both high level and tactical and very, very practical takeaways for founders and for marketers. Thank you so much for the precious time that you have for the audience, and we would love to have you back.
All right, thanks, Holly.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.